Okay, so you want to own an airport, not fly out of one, not manage a lounge inside one. Own the whole thing. The runways, the terminal, the parking structure, the retail concourse, all of it. Picture the number first, because that's the part everyone leads with. A major hub airport can pull in billions of dollars a year in revenue. The global industry, taken together, now clears close to $200 billion annually. Every seat filled, every gate booked, hundreds of flights a day, each one paying a fee just to touch your tarmac. It looks like the ultimate toll booth. You own the only road into the city that actually matters, and everyone has to pay to use it. Departure boards lit up around the clock, security lines forming before sunrise, a duty-free shop doing brisk business at 6 in the morning. On paper, this looks like the safest business on the planet. Infinite demand, zero competition, guaranteed customers. Now, here's where that mental model breaks down. That fee the airline just paid you to land. In most of the world, it's regulated down to almost nothing. Airport charges are set close to cost recovery, meaning by the time you've paid for the runway, the lighting, the air traffic infrastructure, and the safety crew standing by in case something goes wrong, that landing fee has already been spent. You didn't get rich off the plane. You basically broke even on it. Ride that again. The core service, moving aircraft, is often the least profitable thing happening on your property. If landing planes was the whole business, most airports on Earth would be bankrupt. So what's actually making the money? We'll get there. First, let's figure out what kind of airport you're even buying. Because airport isn't one asset class, it's four, and the gap between them is enormous. Tier 1 is the general aviation field. No scheduled airline service, no boarding gates, usually no control tower at all. Just private and business jets, a strip of pavement, a hangar, maybe a small fuel operation. Build cost runs from a few $100,000 for a grass strip up to the tens of millions for a serious paved field with hangars and a fixed base operator. In the United States, roughly 88% of all federally recognized airports fall into this bucket. Almost none of them turn a profit. Hold that thought. We'll come back to why that's tolerated. Tier 2 is small commercial, a real airport with scheduled airline service, but modest volume, generally under 0.25% of national passenger traffic. This is your first tier with mandatory security screening, a real fire and rescue detachment, and a control tower running real hours. Building one from scratch runs somewhere between $100 million and $500 million. Tier 3 is the medium to large hub, the airport that anchors a metro area's air travel, running multiple concourses, round-the-clock operations, and a full commercial retail program. New construction or a major expansion here easily crosses into the $1 to $5 billion range. Tier 4 is the mega hub, the global gateway. Multiple runways, its own police force, its own fire department, sometimes its own hotel and transit system. Denver International cost $4.8 billion to build, and that was 3 decades ago. Modern mega projects, new international gateways going up in fast-growing economies right now, routinely land between $5 and $20 billion, sometimes more, 4 tiers. 4 completely different businesses, and every single one of them, regardless of size, is about to hit you with costs the brochure didn't mention. Let's talk about what it actually costs to get in the door, because the sticker price is only the beginning. The headline construction number, runways, terminal, taxiways, is the part everyone budgets for. It's also the part that consistently blows the budget. Denver International was approved at $1.7 billion in 1989. It opened at $8 billion, nearly 3 times the original number, and it opened 16 months late because the automated baggage system didn't work. That's not a fluke. That's the norm for large infrastructure builds. Decades later, Denver's own terminal renovation, the so-called Great Hall Project, was structured as a $770 million deal. The contractor was fired mid-project over cost disputes. The final bill came in north of $2 billion, at least 3 times the original figure. 7 years behind schedule. So far, so good. Everyone already expects construction to run over budget. Here's what most first-time owners don't budget for at all. First, land. An airport doesn't just need the footprint of its runways. Regulations force you to buy or control enormous buffer zones around them. For noise, for safety, for future expansion, nobody's approved yet. That land sits there generating nothing while you pay taxes and insurance on it. Second, the cost of the money itself. Buried inside Denver's $4.8 billion final number sits over $900 million in capitalized interest alone. The price of borrowing billions of dollars for years before a single ticket gets sold. Every mega project pays this tax, and it rarely makes the press release. Third, certification and compliance. You don't just pour a runway and open for business. You need regulatory certification, ongoing safety audits, and a standing rescue and firefighting crew, fully staffed, fully equipped, on site, 24 hours a day, whether or not a single plane lands that day. That crew doesn't get furloughed on a slow Tuesday 4th. Insurance. Aviation liability coverage is priced for catastrophic loss scenarios. A single incident can generate claims in the hundreds of millions. Your premium reflects that tail risk, not your average Tuesday traffic. 5th, security technology. Explosive detection systems, checkpoint screening equipment, perimeter surveillance, cybersecurity for the systems that run your baggage belts and your runway lighting. All of it has to be purchased, certified, and replaced on a refresh cycle whether traffic is up or down. 6th, the maintenance schedule you can't skip. Runway pavement isn't optional upkeep. It's a regulatory requirement, and resurfacing a single runway is a multi-million-dollar line item that recurs on a fixed clock. Add snow and ice removal fleets sitting idle most of the year, wildlife hazard management, and environmental compliance for fuel handling and noise mitigation. And the maintenance budget alone can rival a mid-sized company's entire operating costs. 7th, and this is the one that actually sinks people. Personnel. Across the industry, personnel costs plus contracted services eat up around 60% of an airport's entire operating budget. That number doesn't move with passenger volume. A slow year doesn't mean a smaller fire crew, fewer security staff, or a shorter control tower shift. The compliance requirements are fixed. Your revenue isn't. Here's a small but honest example of what that looks like in practice. Ogden-Hinckley, a municipal field in Utah, quietly lost $15 million over 16 straight years. Every single year in the red. Subsidized out of the city's general fund because shutting it down was politically worse than absorbing the loss. And that's a functioning, government-backed airport with an active runway. Some small commercial routes only survive on direct subsidy. One federal program has paid out more than $3,700 per passenger just to keep a single small-town route flying. Think about that ratio for a second. The government is spending more per passenger than most people spend on the flight itself. Here's the part nobody puts in the brochure. Most of this spend happens whether or not a plane ever lands. So if the planes aren't the profit center, what is? Globally, airports generated close to $195 billion in revenue in a recent year. More than a third of that, over $70 billion, came from something that has nothing to do with aircraft. Retail, food and beverage, parking, advertising, real estate leasing. Here's the number that should stop you. That non-aeronautical slice, the parking, the shops, the real estate, doesn't just add a little icing on top. Globally, it offsets nearly half of everything an airport spends in a year, not half of the shopping budget. Half of the entire operating and capital cost of running the place. The side of the business you weren't even thinking about is carrying the other side. Here's the mechanism, and it's simpler than people think. Once a passenger clears security, they're standing in a room with zero competition. There's no second airport to walk over to. There's no choice but your shops, your restaurants, and your parking structure. You built a monopoly, and you built it almost by accident, while everyone was busy staring at the runway. In North America specifically, parking alone accounts for over 40% of all non-aeronautical revenue, more than retail and food and beverage combined. Think about what that actually is. A fenced-in lot with painted lines on land you already own, with essentially zero marginal cost per car. That's some of the highest margin real estate in the entire operation, and the retail side runs on a landlord model, not a retailer model. The airport doesn't stock the shelves or carry the inventory risk. A concessionaire builds out the store and hands the airport a percentage of gross sales, typically around 13% for food and beverage, and closer to 16 or 17% for retail and duty-free. The airport fronts none of the build-out cost, carries none of the inventory risk, and still collects rent on every single transaction. Not every passenger is worth the same to you either. A traveler buying a same-day upgrade, a business flyer paying for lounge access, a road warrior parking in the covered structure instead of walking in from the economy lot half a mile out. These are your whales, and they're worth many times more to your non-aeronautical line than someone connecting through on the cheapest fare available. The airport doesn't care which airline they flew. It cares whether they've got 90 minutes in a wallet. Add advertising on top. Every screen, every jet bridge wrap, every baggage carousel loop is inventory you're now selling to a third party, and layer on top of that the property income. Cargo warehouses, hotels, office parks, rental car facilities all leasing land from you, and you've quietly built a diversified real estate portfolio that happens to have a runway attached. Here's the one-to-one way to think about it. Every passenger walking past your gate is a coin flip. Will they spend money in the next 90 minutes, or won't they? But it's a coin flip with no downside for you. If they don't buy anything, you've lost nothing. The store was already built. The rent was already locked in. If they do buy something, that's close to pure margin flowing straight to your top line. You're not betting on the flight. You're betting on boredom, hunger, and a captive audience with nowhere else to go. And unlike almost any other retail landlord in the world, your tenant can't lose a customer to the store down the street because there isn't one. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable if you're the one actually running this thing. None of it works without the foot traffic the airline side generates. The runway is your customer acquisition cost. You're operating a shopping mall that spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year just to keep the doors open, because the doors are what bring the customers in. Take the planes away, and the highest margin real estate portfolio on earth is worth nothing. Quick detour, because you're probably wondering who actually owns these things. In most of the world, the answer is still the government, a city, a state, a national aviation authority, financing everything through the bond market we just talked about. But since the 1980s, a second model has been spreading fast. Long-term concessions, sometimes 50 years or more, handed to private consortiums. Heathrow, Gatwick, most of Australia's major hubs, Delhi and Mumbai in India, all run today by infrastructure funds, sovereign wealth funds, and pension funds chasing exactly the steady monopoly-adjacent cash flow we just described. The United States is the outlier. The vast majority of American airports are still stuck with old-fashioned municipal ownership, which is a big part of why so many of them behave like public utilities instead of businesses. Which brings us to how this actually falls apart. Airports don't go bankrupt because business is slow. They go bankrupt because the fixed costs and the debt service were built on a traffic forecast that turned out to be fiction, and once that capital is poured into concrete, there's no scaling it back down. Here's the financial mechanism underneath that risk. Airports almost never pay up front in cash. They're financed with long-term revenue bonds, sold to investors on the promise of a passenger count projected decades into the future. Miss that projection by a wide enough margin, and you're not just missing a sales target, you're in default on debt that has no interest in why the passengers didn't show up. Case 1, Ciudad Real Central Airport, Spain. Built during the country's construction boom for 1.1 billion euros, with a runway long enough to land an Airbus A380, one of the longest in Europe. The plan was millions of passengers a year, pitched as relief for a congested Madrid. The problem? No direct rail link to Madrid, and the airport opened right as the 2008 financial crisis hit. Airlines pulled out one by one. The last one standing, Vueling, walked away in 2011. By 2012, with debts north of 300 million euros and zero path back to solvency, the operator filed for bankruptcy. In 2015, the whole airport sold at auction for 10,000 euros. A billion-euro asset sold for less than the price of a used car because the traffic that justified building it never showed up in the first place. Case 2, Kansai International, Japan. This one's different because the traffic was real. Over 25 million passengers a year moving through an engineering marvel built on an artificial island. But the island was sinking from the day it opened, and every year of defensive infrastructure to hold it above water piled more cost on top of an already $20 billion build. Debt climbed toward the high teens of billions before Japan restructured the whole operation into a long-term private concession just to make the balance sheet survivable. Kansai didn't fail on demand. It failed because the engineering assumption baked into the original spend was wrong on day one, and there's no renegotiating with the ocean. Different failure mode, same lesson. Once the concrete is poured, you're locked into the bet you made on day one. There's no version of this business where you lay off your runway or negotiate your debt payment down because ticket sales were soft this quarter. So what does ownership actually return? Zoom out on the ongoing economics, and a pattern holds across the entire industry. Operating costs eat up roughly 2/3 of everything an airport spends every year, with capital spending making up the other third, and that split barely moves whether you're the busiest hub in the world or a half-empty regional field. The cost side was never the differentiator. The differentiator is whether your revenue scaled to match it. Optimistic scenario. You own a major hub with a strong non-aeronautical mix, parking, retail, and real estate doing the heavy lifting. Run well, over a long enough horizon, that's a genuinely attractive infrastructure asset. Steady, monopoly-adjacent cash flow, which is exactly why pension funds and infrastructure investors fight over these deals whenever a stake comes up for sale. Double-digit operating margins, decade over decade, are realistic at this tier, and the asset only gets more valuable as the region around it grows. Realistic scenario. And statistically, the more likely one, you own something in the other 88%. A general aviation field or a small commercial airport that never generates enough non-aeronautical volume to cover its fixed costs. You operate at a structural loss, permanently, propped up by public money, and the capital you put in never comes back. That's not the exception. For the vast majority of airports on Earth, that's the default outcome, and no amount of enthusiasm changes the math. The math gives you a guaranteed top line. The runway gets planes down every time on schedule, like clockwork. But nobody buys an airport for the planes. Go back to where we started. You thought you were buying the right to land airplanes. You weren't. You were buying access to millions of travelers and everything they do in the 90 minutes before their flight. The runway was never the business. It was the price of admission. And if you can't make everything downstream of it pay, the runway alone will bury you in debt long before it ever pays you back.